Welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast, brought to you by the All About Pigeons nonprofit organization, which is dedicated to promoting education and promotion of the pigeon hobby. Every week, a listener requests to drive our conversations about all things pigeons. Join me, Philip Fry, as we learn and share stories about these incredible birds and this ancient hobby. Today, we're going to be talking all about the breed Komorner Tumbler with Tim England. Tim is the doctor of veterinary medicine and a lifelong breeder of pigeons and has been breeding the Komorner Tumbler since 2018. So, Tim, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this breed with us today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you.
You got started with this breed in 2018. What other breeds have you kind of messed around with and what led you into this breed?
Yeah, so I actually had Komorners back in the 70s. They were very different from the modern Komorners, how they look today. But I was an avid 4-H'er and had a collection of lots of different pigeons. My father raised giant runt pigeons, and that was one of the reasons that we had pigeons. He allowed me to dabble and have whatever was my breed of choice at the time. And so I had started out with pygmy powders. I had Medinas. We had show kings. I had pairs of rollers. There were in the 70s and early 80s, there were a lot of people with pigeons, a higher concentration of people. And where I grew up in Michigan, you're this, 13-year-old kid who liked pigeons, people would give you pigeons. So I was inundated with people wanting to set me up. And I had a great friendships with a lot of adults who had really amazingly nice flocks of birds.
Very cool. Yeah, so you were around these breeds back in the 70s then, yeah, but the standard has changed a little bit since then.
Yeah, I think that definitely they've improved their characteristics that really make them a Komorner tumbler as far as their heads and crests and their body styles and just overall, the quality of the birds has dramatically improved.
It is considered a tumbler breed. Have you ever seen it fly, tumble, or has it always been a showbird when you've had it?
So, where I live in Michigan, there's a lot of hawks, especially
Oh,
migrating right now. But I did have, and I still do have a pair of sibling birds that were we hand fed because they were orphaned when they were young, and they were allowed to free flight, and they would kind of do little flips. Definitely not a good rolling tumble, but I don't know anybody who regularly flies their birds with Komorner tumblers. They just clearly at their origin of their breed, they are tumblers, and that's those genes are still floating around in them.
you're either going to show, like you say, you kind of have one pair that was allowed to fly around because, yeah, flying birds don't show very well. So one or the other.
Yes, and they were imprinted on me, so I could take them out, and they, would be on my shoulder and would take off and fly around my barn and come back and land on me again. So it was kind of fun to see them go.
Excellent. And then the name of this bird is where they're from. Can you talk a little bit about the history and what went into that?
They originated in modern day Slovakia, in a town called Kamarno or Komoran. It's on the border of Hungary and Slovakia, probably 18th, 19th century. They were a flying breed that had a shell crest, and those are the origins of that breed. As people got a hold of them and started breeding them, developed a standard that deviated away from the qualities that made them good flyers, and has come through into our modern day Komorner tumblers. The birds that are still in Europe, I should say that I raise American Komorner tumblers. They're definitely very different than the European birds, who have very different heads, much shorter beaks. The proportion of their eye and their head shape is definitely different. Our standard is quite different from the European standard.
So they have that really unique crest on the sides.
Yes.
There's not too many other breeds that have crests like that. I mean, you'll see, a lot of the other standard style that you'll have a front crest and a rear.
Yeah, but and that's one of the things that drew me to them. I mean, the thing that I think people are often really initially drawn to is the magpie pattern, which is very distinctive.
Oh yeah.
and then they see, that shell crest with the two big rosettes on either side, which is interesting and certainly distinctive as far as that breed goes. There are other breeds out there that have some, I mean, some other breeds with similar crest styles, like the Russian tumblers and things like that. But I'm definitely a fan of birds without feathers on their feet and legs. They're just here in Michigan. It's easier in the foul weather seasons to not have feathers on their legs. So that was, I think, one of the other reasons that I was attracted to the breed.
Every time I see him, I always think of Princess Leia. It makes me wonder if George Lucas had some Komorner tumblers in the loft or
Yeah,
something.
there you go. There you
So they're clean-legged. They can fly around. Is
go.
your loft a pretty standard loft? And I know you're up in what can be a pretty cold climate, but can you kind of describe what your loft setup is like?
Yeah, I typically breed in like an 8 by 8 or 8 by 10 foot space. I'll usually keep 4 to 6 pairs in the space. So open loft with 4 or 6 pairs. All of my lofts have little outside fly pen for them to sunbathe and have a bath pan and things like that in them. I pretty much set up if I've got 4 birds in there, there's at least, 12 nest bowls and sites for them to choose from because they are definitely prolific breeders and, they will get their babies, 2 weeks in and then they'll start deciding to reclutch and, raise another clutch right after. So they definitely need plenty of space and plenty of opportunities to have their nest bowls to guard and hang out in.
And I'm really interested about going through some of these loft management questions for you, since you are a DVM.
Sure.
How about like deworming and vaccinating? Can you walk us through how you do that,
Yeah.
or if you do?
Oh, absolutely. I think disease prevention is definitely a huge part of my loft management. I mean, I have the same problems everybody else has. So if you're going to have intestinal parasites, roundworms are the big one that most guys deal with. And so I often will use alternating deworming products, something in the family with the ivermectins, or I'll use Pyrantel. So both really super safe dewormers for the birds. All of my breeders get dewormed directly, immediately before I set them up in the and I typically pair up in early February. Every baby gets dewormed at 30 days of age when I wean them, and then they are dewormed in their first year, typically every 3 months thereafter. And my breeders get dewormed probably 3 times a year. As far as vaccines go, I vaccinate my birds for PMV, so Paramyxo, as well as for salmonella or typhoid. I do things that are not necessarily on the label. The label says, birds are 30 days of age, but I think that from knowing a little bit more about immunology of the birds, I actually give my first vaccines to my babies when they're 2 weeks old, and then they get their repeat. That's PMV. I'll vaccinate at 2 weeks. They'll get their booster at 4 weeks old when I wean them, and often will get their first typhoid vaccine at the same time or 2 weeks after that. And then they get their final typhoid vaccine 2 weeks after the first typhoid. So usually by about 6 weeks, they're fully vaccinated as far as my vaccine protocol. They've been dewormed. I don't really have a lot of bird. I mean, I typically don't do anything prophylactically with my adult birds for um, things other than that. I don't prophylactically give them antibiotics. I don't prophylactically treat them for canker. I'll often give a canker tab to the babies the day I wean them, but that's just because they're a little bit stressed and immunologically they're a little bit more immature. But canker is not really a problem in my loft. And I mean, canker is well adapted to pigeons. I'm not saying I don't have canker in my loft because your canker wants to live with pigeons. Pigeons are used to living with canker. It's the things that tend to cause your birds to be stressed and concurrent illnesses that make them have symptomatic canker infections, but there's probably something bigger going on when you have birds with canker.
What age are you weaning the birds out?
Right around day 30. And
Okay.
by that time, typically most of the parents already have, you know, new clutches that they're feeding squabs that are recently hatched. And so the parents are just kind of ready to be done with them. Although, We do have, I do see, if I leave them, pairs will continue to feed their freshly hatched squabs, as well as, you know, feed these freeloading birds that are old enough to start feeding themselves. But I try to pull them out just because I'm wanting to get them into a young bird pen and observe them a little more closely and make sure they're eating and get them off to a good start.
And what about lice and mites? How do you control that in your lofts?
The incidences that I've seen lice on birds, or when I get new birds that are coming in, I typically use ivermectin derivatives or topical things, insecticides or ectoparasite products that have some residual activity and long acting. So I currently am using a potentiated ivermectin that the label says it lasts for up to a year from two drops on your birds. I don't necessarily know that I trust it to last that long, so I have been dosing the birds every 4 to 6 months and have not really found lice or mites on my birds and have been pretty happy with it so far.
That's something you just put drops right on the back of the birds.
Yep, directly on their skin. So you part the feathers
Oh,
and
okay.
put the drops on them. So, I mean, I am not a fan of flock treatment of anything. So if I'm treating a bird, I'm treating the bird, not their water bowl, not their food. They're getting medicated, because that way they got it, and you know what dose they got. I think, just from a standpoint of really good husbandry, if you've got so many birds that you can't handle your birds and actually figure out a plan to dose them and medicate them, you've probably got too many birds.
That's a good point right
And
there.
that's my opinion. I think my birds, I mean, you see the difference when you're showing your birds.
Yeah, and that's the age old quality over quantity.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And I mean, I'm had a really successful, breeding season this year. I had I bred from 17 birds. I banded and weaned 92 baby Komorners. So we've had a good year. And but they're it's intense. I mean, I work really hard when I'm at work, but when I'm done working, I, like to play with my pigeons, and I can spend the day just sweeping the loft and cleaning things and, medicating babies and vaccinating and deworming them, because that's fun for me.
So you mentioned that even in situations where we talked about the weaning there, you mentioned that the parents will be working on a new nest and getting those babies up and still kind of taking care of the ones that are apprehensive to leave. So
Yep.
I'm guessing that these guys, they sound like they're pretty good parents, and they can obviously they breed pretty well.
Yeah, I think they're great, really good parents. They feed their babies well. They go recycle really quickly. They're good feeders, good eaters. They are pretty easy to keep, as in my opinion. So they don't need a lot of coaxing. They're definitely not delicate. They're pretty tough little birds.
Anytime we don't have to foster, that makes it a lot easier.
Yep, for sure.
So let's talk about getting this bird ready for show. So you got the young birds, and they're coming into their own a little bit. You can see how some of the colors and markings and everything's coming along with them. We're getting into the show season right now, being October. What are some of the steps that you're taking and getting ready to show your birds?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the earlier they hatch, the further along they are in their molt when as show season approaches. There in Comorners, there are three patterns. There's selfs, which are whole colored birds, so they're all the same color. There are white flights, so they're a whole colored bird with all the primary flight feathers are white. And then there's the magpie pattern, which is the typical pattern that, when people think Komorner Tumbler, that's the ones they think of. And I would say the population of magpies is probably a lot higher, just because that's what people think of with Comores. When selecting birds, as far as show birds, the highest point, as far as scoring them in the magpie pattern birds, is their pattern itself. And so the standard is very specific on which parts should be colored, which parts should be white, and what that should look like. And that's a big, you know, criteria for selection of birds that you're going to keep on and try to develop to show in the fall. If they're mismarked from the get go, you don't even waste your time on them. I mean, my typical protocol is making sure that the birds are kept well kept all the time, so that by the time show season shows up, they're in good feather, good body condition, they're ready to go. I don't put anything in the water except in their water pan or in their bath pans. It's just plain water, but they get opportunities to bathe. Some of them have water pans constantly. Might typically the younger birds get opportunities to bathe twice a week. Trim toenails, clean up feet, make sure their beaks are in good shape, make sure that their flight feathers are not damaged, and plucking feathers 6 weeks out before a show if they do have a damaged feather. I rarely find a lot of damaged feathers on my Komorners. They're pretty much pretty good at maintaining themselves and taking good care of themselves, especially if your birds aren't overly crowded. Yeah, they're ready to go. The biggest thing is I would say is cleaning up their feet, making sure their toenails are trimmed appropriately, their bands are nice and shiny and clean, because I think that sells your birds as far as if a judge looks at your birds and they've got crappy, dirty feet and they've got crusted up bands, it kind of looks to the condition and how well the pigeon keepers taking care of their birds. The thing about Komorners is that crest and those rosettes are probably the last things to really when they're having their first adult molt, getting them into good shape so that they actually look good and they're full and they can look a little shabby clear up until almost mid-October before those birds are really looking well enough that you'd be proud to show them. Those early shows are sometimes pretty rough
Yeah.
looking Komorners.
Yeah, those early ones are rough. Everyone's still just on the tail end of the molt, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So can you lay out the point value and how it breaks down for the Comroners?
Yeah, so there's actually the point scale for the breed is 110 points. The white flights and the magpies have different breakdown than the self birds because pattern is such a big component of those two colors, and so pattern is like 20 points out of that 110. The big things that are important parts of that make a Komorner. So crest and rosettes. Are high points. They're actually Comorners are a color breed, and so color points are really a big thing, and that you want appropriate colors and rich colors. That's a high end. Things like body condition and station. I mean, Comorners should stand on their tiptoes, and they should. There's a lot of Comorners that walk around like a duck, and Comorners really need to be up almost. And the thing I like to say is they actually you want them to look a little taller than they are long, just because they need to be kind of that real upright and have station that really throws their heads up high and gets them looking like a perky little bird. So a Komorner who actually holds itself and moves well and has great station is really a dramatic difference from some of those birds that don't station well. It shows off the crest rosettes, the body type. You want that real tumbler body with that big chest, big thick pectoral muscles, because those birds are flying birds, and so they need to look like they are designed to fly.
So the standard is kind of staying true to that. Then that's really good to see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So going to the shows, is there anything that you would say overall the breed is kind of struggling with or needs to work on, common faults?
In faults, I would say definitely station in the birds. The older Komorners, I mean, had definitely had much more narrow heads, didn't have as big of broad crests and rosettes. The best birds don't always have the longest crest and rosette feathers, because you really want those nice thick manes and you want thick necks on them. You want the rosettes to be full and complete. So like a nice big, silver dollar size rosette with a good center that whirls around is really important. That nice full shell crest doesn't have breaks in it, a nice mane down the back of their neck that those rosettes actually form the backside of the rosettes, and so it really gives them a really kind of a thick blocky neck, and the density of the feathers makes those birds look dramatically better than a poorly bred bird or a bird that is not quite as superior as the birds that are in the winning group.
There's definitely a lot of good features to work with, and it's a beautiful bird based on everything that you're talking about here. Would you recommend this bird for someone who is just getting into the fancy side, or would this be something who's already been into the showing world and kind of like an intermediate?
I think there's something for everybody. I mean, the nice thing is that we've got a great group of people who are breeding them that are always generous with, quality birds and their time. I think somebody could come into the breed and get a good start, and there's always space for developing better and better birds. So yeah, and as someone who has experience and is has been breeding birds for, you know, I would say over my lifetime, but more intensely in the last, 8 years or so, there's definitely a lot of challenges for me, that's what makes it exciting for me is that I continue to see my birds developing and getting better and better. The magpie birds have always been far superior in quality than the self birds, and there's a bunch of us guys who are enjoy the selves and so have been working to improve the selves, and they're starting to come along, and we're starting to see in some of the shows that a self bird will actually be the best of breed versus a magpie, which typically always won.
Is there any specific books of this breed or any other resources that you recommend for people that are looking into this breed?
There's not a specific book that I think is is current and up to date. I think you know NPA's The Standard is a great reference and a resource. Read that thing, know what you're looking for. Being a member of a club that supports it and is active, definitely gives you opportunities to talk to people and look at birds and see, what's what what information that they can share. And I glean stuff from every time I go to a show and talk to somebody. And I think that's the great thing about pigeons is there's a lot of unwritten knowledge that's out there that just by talking to people and you know building relationships really gives you access to a lot of information.
That's good advice. Get out to the shows and check out the breeds and talk to the breeders. That's always solid.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that are beginners that are intimidated because I mean, especially with this breed, there's a lot of people who've been around for long enough that they have nice quality birds, and beginners sometimes are intimidated to show. And I mean, if you're showing and your club is, you know, working together, we should really all work to promote, new people to excel and feel comfortable, exhibiting their birds and not feel intimidated. That's detrimental to the longevity of our clubs and the longevity of our hobby. So,
Yeah,
you know, bolster people, build people up. It's makes it fun. That's the best thing for me is just share information and help people and see somebody do well. It makes me just as happy to see a bird that I sold or I sold a pair of birds to the breeder who raised the bird at the show that does well, as it does if it's the bird, I own the bird myself. That's all just growing the hobby.
are there any other tips or advice that you've kind of gained from, breeding and working with this breed specifically that you'd share out?
Not specifically, I would say, raising pigeons even it's a year-round project and it's a year-round thing. Your birds are going to look way better on the show table if you feed your birds, all spring, summer, winter, fall, and take good care of them. It's not about getting them ready for show. Your birds should be cared for and showable year round. Obviously, not when they're molting, but what I'm saying is a well-fed, nutritionally complete, healthy bird is gonna that you just don't develop that in the month when they're molting or the weeks in advance of a show. It's take care of your birds year round. It'll pay off when you're exhibiting them.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's something that I've heard multiple times too, is that if you're always ready, you don't have to get ready, just have your birds at that condition as much as you can, yeah, throughout the year.
Yep.
As far as we have the national club here in the States, the National Pigeon Association for it's an all breeds one. What about for the breed specific clubs? And I know we talked earlier about some of the Facebook groups. Can you talk a little bit about the Facebook groups that are associated with this breed?
Yeah, so there's lots of Facebook groups out there. I am a moderator of the Komorner Tumbler Association. There, our page is we try to be active. We try to throw things out there and keep people interested in and encourage people to ask questions and put information out there. It is a breed that does have you know four four clubs that are, in North America. They are all at different levels of activity and different levels of, you know, um, their boards and directors are being aggressive or active in promoting the breeds. I think that there's a club out there for anybody, depending on what level of interest they have. I think the best thing about pigeons is really the social aspects of other, learning and growing with other pigeon keepers, and whether it be, within the same breed or even, an all breed club. Pigeons are pigeons are pigeons. So, there are things specific for each breed, but there's also, 90% of commonalities between, the metabolism and the health of one pigeon versus, whatever breed it is.
Well, excellent. Yeah, if anybody wants to check it out, yeah, he's like you said, there's multiple Facebook groups on there. Then there's the Komorner Tumbler Association one. If you're interested, check them out on Facebook. Tim, it's a pleasure having you on the show again. I really appreciate it, and it's always nice talking pigeons with you.
Always good to talk to you. And I think your podcast is a great benefit to the hobby, and it gets people interested. And every time I listen to it, no matter what you're talking about, always, it makes me think. It makes me want to do better. So I think that's something that all of us can benefit from. So thank you for doing it.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you for listening to another ad-free, listener-requested episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. If you like the show and want to help it keep it going, as well as supporting your other pigeon promotional work, head to the website PigeonPod, that's pigeonpod.com. You can make a donation there. If you can't make a donation today, support the show by giving us a good 5-star review wherever you're listening to us at right now. That really helps the podcast and helps the algorithm get us out there to other people who might not know about Pigeon Podcast. If you have any episode requests, upcoming pigeon shows, competition results, or you want to be a guest on the show and just talk about some pigeons, or you have a shout out for a friend, shoot us an email at staff@pigeonpod.com. Thanks again for listening. We really appreciate your support, and remember, together the hobby thrives. Support each other and enjoy your pigeons.